Hello, everyone. My name's Anna, and I'm the teacher for the IELTS preparation course. This specific course has three different main lectures to it because we're going to go over the speaking tasks, and there's three speaking tasks. The first speaking task we'll go over today. We'll go over speaking task two in the second day, and then speaking task three in the third day. Okay. There's also, if anyone's interested in more information about all of those, there is more information on the course outline, but do also feel free to contact me if you have any questions. There's also more information on the IELTS website as well. So that's another great resource for you to look at too. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so what's our plan for today specifically? For speaking task one, you're going to need to introduce yourself to the examiner. You're going to need to talk about the place where you live, talk about your personal experiences, and also answer questions with fluency and confidence because that's what they're looking for too. They're looking at, first of all, the actual answers that you say. They're also looking for proper grammar. They're looking for good fluency, right? So they don't want you to be pausing between words or things like that. And they're also looking for correct pronunciation. So making sure you're able to pronounce the words properly is really important too. They're looking for all of those things. Okay. And in this course, for anyone who has purchased this course, there are going to be some examples, and you are able to submit some sample answers for my feedback as well, and how you would score according to the IELTS website and their scoring credentials as well. So there will be feedback even if you are asynchronous, just watching this lecture video. Totally fine. You can still get that feedback. That's the real point of this, is to learn from me, but also to be able to do it yourself and be able to get the proper feedback that you need, improve for the next time, and then continue on that path until you are ready to complete the speaking task with confidence. All right, so let's do a little warm up. Let's just talk quickly about what types of questions people usually ask when you first meet them. And also, what types of questions will you ask someone when you first meet them? So, for example, what is your name? Very, very common one. Where are you from, or what is your background? These are very similar questions as well. Who are your family members? What's your favorite food? What are your hobbies? And what do you do for work? So all of these questions you could pretty much answer in just a couple of sentences. There are questions later on where we'll talk about needing to answer them with more than just one sentence. In this case, you can just stick to the one sentence answers, then that's fine. So, for example, my name is Anna. I am from Mississauga, Ontario, Canada. What is your background? My background is I'm from Greece on my dad's side. My dad is Greek, and my mom is Irish, so that's my background. Then we have who are your family members? So my main family members, anyways, are my mother, my father, I have two brothers who are younger than I am. My family also has two dogs, and I live with my husband, but we don't have any children. What are your hobbies? I like to go fishing. I like to paint. I like to bead. I like to cross stitch. I enjoy craft projects very much, etc. Right? Any hobbies you have are good. And what do you do for work? I work as a teacher mainly. Yeah. All right, so that's our warm up. And the purpose here is just to kind of get us used to answering these types of questions. I wouldn't necessarily say you need to memorize your answers for every single question you're going to be asked, but I think over time of practicing answering these kinds of questions, you'll kind of get used to what your general answers are, right? To the point where you're not going to have to think about how to answer what your name is or what your background is or your favorite food or things like that, because these are pretty common, pretty predictable questions. Now, in tasks two and three, in parts two and three of our speaking exercise, sometimes the topics aren't as predictable. We have to come up with things on the spot and use the English language ability that we have or that we can obtain. With these types of questions, though, they're pretty predictable. There's not really too much they're going to throw at you here that you haven't already heard at some point, which is good. All right. So, introducing yourself, I'm actually going to give an example here. Here we can see five pictures of a person, and I mean, I guess you can probably tell that this is me. And you're supposed to kind of look at these pictures and make some inferences about who I might be, what kind of lifestyle I might live, and how I might introduce myself. So let's look at this first picture here. Okay, looks like I'm holding a degree from University of Toronto. And also I can see a big city in the background, and we know that Toronto is a big city, or if you don't know that, then that's okay. You know that now. Toronto is a big city. It's the capital city of Ontario, actually. So it's a major city. So we can probably guess based on this picture that I live in Toronto and completed a degree at the university there, is what we can probably infer. Second picture, this is another picture of the big city as well. So, another confirmation of what we said before, that I most likely live in a big city. This also in the first picture looks like there's a balcony there. So, probably in an apartment at a big city on one of the floors there. The next picture looks like a bathtub with a bath bomb and looks like a drink of some sort. And then looks like a razor and some, bath type products, maybe a salt scrub and lotions or face cream, things like that in the bathtub. So that suggests that perhaps I like to have a relaxing bath at the end of a long day in the big city. Because the big city can be a lot, right? So that could be that one, right? I enjoy taking baths as opposed to showers, or maybe baths just bathing is something I like to do to just relax, especially given we can see some sort of drink and also a bath bomb there as well, rather than just a bath normally. Then here we can see there's me again, and there is a bearded dragon there. So looks like I have a pet bearded dragon. And then in this picture, I see two dogs. These are Wheaten Terrier dogs, but either way, we can, even if you aren't familiar with breeds of dogs, we can tell those are dogs. So perhaps I have two dogs, or in this case, actually, my family has two dogs. But we could probably infer, we could probably look here and see, oh, I have two dogs, or maybe my family has two dogs. And lizards and dogs, right? Reptiles and dogs, they're both different types of animals. So perhaps I like animals, right? That could be something we could get from here, right? And so by looking at these pictures, there's certain things about me that you might be able to guess, right? And same with anyone, right? You could look at some pictures on somebody's Facebook profile or some pictures someone is using to introduce themselves. And there's certain things you could perhaps guess about that person and what kind of lifestyle that they live, right? So here's an example answer. My name is Anna, and I currently live in Toronto, which is the capital city of Ontario. I graduated with an honors bachelor's degree from the University of Toronto. I like to explore and work in the big city during the day, but also enjoy a nice warm bath after a long day at work. I have a bearded dragon named Echo and two dogs named Bentley and Scooter. So there we go. There's an example answer. Now, that said, if your answer was not exactly the same, that's okay, right? The key things here are, did we get those key points of, big city, degree from Toronto, something about Bath, right? Something about having some pets, right? Those are the main things we want to get across. Also, did we express those in full sentences that were coherent and made sense in the order? That's also something that matters when we introduce ourselves, right? We want to have good transitions, right? It's important to have good transitions. It's important to make sure that we're being clear and concise, right? That we're not just repeating ourselves with the same words again and again. That sort of thing is important too. So those are some key pointers here. So is your answer going to be the same as my answer? No, it isn't. But here's kind of an example of how we might structure that to introduce ourselves. Okay, let's also go over some sample questions from this part of the task. One thing they'll almost always ask you is, could you tell me your full name, please? Okay, so they want your first name and your last name. Then they may ask, what should I call you? So what is your preferred name? So for most people, their preferred name is just going to be called their first name, right? You can call me Anna, for example. Would be good. Some people prefer to be called like a nickname, so a name they have chosen for themselves that isn't technically their legal name, right? Because when they ask, could you tell me your full name, please? They want to know, what is your legal name? What does it say on your driver's license or some piece of ID? That's what they're asking for. However, some people prefer to be called a different name, right? For example, someone whose full name might be, I won't say a last name, but let's say Elizabeth Smith, for example, right? Elizabeth first name, Smith last name. Some people whose full name is Elizabeth Smith might prefer to be called Lizzie instead of Elizabeth. That's a short form, right? So that would be an example of when they ask, "Can you tell me your full name, please?" That person should say, "My full name is Elizabeth Smith. What should I call you? You can call me Lizzie." Right? If you prefer Lizzie, or if you prefer a form of your name or some other nickname, then that's kind of the difference between "what should I call you" versus what is your full name, please. Your full name is what's on your driver's license. What is your legal name actually, according to the law? What is your name? And then "what should I call you" is just, well, it can be anything that you prefer to be called, but oftentimes it is just your first name, right? The next one is, does your name have any special meaning, right? So this could be any special meaning in your country or your culture. It also could be, just in your family in general. So maybe you were named after someone. Maybe you have the same name as your mother, or the same name as your father, or the same name as a grandparent, or the same name as a specific famous person or role model that your parents liked. And so that's why they gave you that name. Maybe the name has a special meaning in your country or culture. It could be another one. So anything like that would be a reasonable answer for that question. Then they ask, is your name important to you? Right? So maybe your name is important to you because of that special meaning it has. Maybe it isn't really, and it's just kind of what your name is. And either way, that's all right, right? Another one, do you work, study, or both, right? So do you have a job, or do you go to school, or do you do both things currently? You could talk about that. You could talk about, what do you do for work? They might ask. So, for example, I'm a teacher. Maybe you are a teacher. Maybe you're an engineer. Maybe you work in retail. You work at a store, right? Whatever it is that you do for work, you could answer that here. What do you like about your job? For this one, you could just say, what is one thing you enjoy about your job? What do you dislike about your job? Same kind of thing, just one thing that maybe you don't like as much about your job. You go into a little bit of detail there about why you like something or why you don't like something about your job is also good as well. How long have you been working at your job? So maybe it's been a few years. Maybe you just started at that job a few months ago and it's a new job for you. Maybe your job's had to switch because of the pandemic a few years ago, right? Lots of different possible answers there. Why did you choose the job you have? So, this could again be something that you liked about the job, or perhaps it's a common job in your place, right? Because oftentimes people will choose a job because it's the job they'll enjoy most. But also, there needs to be some sort of market demand for that job. So it also could be because you enjoyed it, but also there was a need for more people to do that job in the area. And so you saw a need and decided to go pursue that, for example, could be another reason. Or maybe the workplace lets you work from home and you prefer that. Or maybe this workplace, they give you flexibility and allows you to spend more time with your family, right? There could be other kind of logistical things, logistical reasons as to why you chose your job, right? Or for example, I worked in Toronto, and now that I am moving away from Toronto to another place, I am no longer going to have the same job because it's no longer going to be close to where I live, right? And so that's a factor too, is you're going to choose a job that is close to where you live. Hopefully you're not going to choose a job that's hours away from the place where you live, right? So that could be another logistical reason why you chose your job, right? So anything like that works. It could be about the actual job itself, but it could also be something, there's also logistical reasons why everyone chooses the job that they have is the reality too, right? Okay, here's some other ones. What subject are you studying? So pretty straightforward. Maybe you're studying mathematics or English or science or literature or economics. or finance, or I'm trying to think of other subjects, perhaps social sciences or humanities. There's endless different subjects that someone might be studying at their school. So any of those is good. You might be asked, which school do you attend? So again, a pretty straightforward one of which school you attend. What do you like about your studying and what do you dislike about your studying? So, this could have to do with the subject you're studying, it could have to do with the school, it could be just the busyness of studying is challenging. It takes up a lot of our time to do so. Maybe it's the cost of education could be something you dislike about your studying, or maybe the cost is very reasonable for you, and so that's something you like about your studying is you're able to do it at a reasonable cost for you. So that could be good, right? What job would you like to have after you graduate, right? Then maybe you're not quite sure, or maybe you do know exactly which job you'd like to do, but either of those is fine. Okay. Let's move on to this one. Here they ask, where are you from? Where were you born? Now, these are very similar types of questions. Where are you from? Actually, that's an interesting one because that could mean the same as where were you born. So, for example, I was born in Mississauga, so I'm from Mississauga, Ontario, which is part of the Greater Toronto Area. It's very close to Toronto for anyone who's not sure where that is. But where are you from could also mean like where was your family originally from, right? My family originally was from Europe, a few different places in Europe, so I could talk about that. Where were you born is specifically where you were born, right? So where when you were born, where was that, right? Which country or which province or state or city was that you were born in? Okay, the next one, what is your nationality? So, nationality specifically refers to citizenship. For example, I am a Canadian citizen, right? So, meaning I pay taxes in Canada, I'm a Canadian taxpayer, and I also live in Canada as well, right? Canada is my nationality because I'm a citizen of Canada, right? So, whichever country you're a citizen of, that would be your nationality. Then tell me about your hometown. Oh, okay. So, hometown is the town where you currently are living. It could be the same as the city where you were born, or if you've moved since then, that could be a different city as well. So, you could talk a bit about your hometown. Is it a small town? Is it a big city? How many people live there is something you could add if you wanted to. You could talk about something you like about your hometown or something you don't like about your hometown. This is a more broad one, right? Some of them are very specific of where were you born? Well, there's one specific answer to that, right? But tell me about your hometown. It's a bit more broad, right? There's a few different ways you could go about answering that question. Oh, and I guess now they ask, what do you like about your hometown and dislike about your hometown? What's the weather like in your town? So, it's gonna slightly vary from person to person, but it depends. Maybe your town it's very warm all year round. Maybe it's cold all year round. Maybe it changes with the seasons. I would say in Toronto, Ontario, it's very hot in the summer. It usually is about 30 degrees in the summer. In the winter, it's very cold. It's usually, it can get to negative 10 degrees. There is lots of snow. It's not very pleasant to be outside. And spring and fall are in between those two, right? So some places it's hot all year round, just sometimes it's less hot than other times. Like in Florida or California, for example, they have a very warm climate, right? Their winter, they do have winter there, but it's not a very cold winter. They don't usually get snow in the winter, I don't think anyway. Even in Georgia, which is just above Florida, even if they get a little bit of snow, everything's all shut down because it's not something they really have very often there. It's not really something expected there up in Georgia, as an example, right? So, what's the weather like in your town? You could talk about temperature. You could also talk about is it cloudy often? Does it rain often? Do you usually get thunderstorms? You could talk about are there usually natural disasters in your area? So, is your area known for earthquakes or tornadoes or tsunamis, things like that? Are any of those things a major concern in your area? You could talk about that as well. What jobs do people usually do in your town? So for this one, you wouldn't have to talk about every single job, but if there's any job that's specific to your town, you could discuss that. So for example, there's some towns where there's a lot of people who do construction work specifically in that town. Or maybe there's other places that are known as, for example, Waterloo, Ontario is known for having a lot of tech workers, a lot of people who are software engineers, computer engineers, and so on, right? People doing those kinds of jobs in the tech industry, right? So there are kind of different there's some places that maybe aren't necessarily known for having a specific type of job, and then there's other places where there are many different jobs available, but it's more known for some certain jobs than for other jobs as well is possible. How has your town changed over the past few years? So, that's pretty broad. Maybe there's more people who have come to your town. Maybe the town has gotten smaller, there's less people. Maybe there was a new shopping mall that was built in your town. Is there more construction work than there used to be, right? Anything like that could be there. Or maybe your town really hasn't changed, and that's fine as well. But do try to think of something because I think in general, most towns have at least had some change, even if it's a very small change, right? Maybe there was a new mayor who was introduced in the last few years. Do try to find something to talk about as opposed to do try to avoid just saying, oh, it hasn't changed at all, right? Because there's probably something you could talk about there. Okay, how do you usually travel? So, how do you usually travel? Well, that could be a number of ways. Some people travel by car, mostly. Some people travel by public transit, like a bus or a subway, something like that. Other people, maybe you live in a very walkable city where you just walk to most places that you need to get to, or take a bike to most places you get to. Or maybe there's another way you usually travel, right? So, how do you usually travel depends on you. For me, I usually travel by car personally. However, there's people who usually travel by bus, and I certainly did as a student as well. There were times in my life I usually traveled by just walking places, so it just depends. It absolutely just depends. What is the public transit system like in your town? Well, in my town, in Toronto, well, the city Toronto, there's a lot of public transit. I would say there's a whole subway system that goes quite far. There's also the Go buses and Greyhound buses that go to other cities. So you can go to Toronto from Toronto to another major city in just one stop. There's also buses and streetcars as well to go shorter distances if you don't have a car or if you don't like to drive there because it's very trafficy in Toronto. There's lots of traffic. It's really not the best place to drive, in my opinion. I dislike the amount of traffic there, so there is a lot of public transit in this town. In some places, though, I recognize there might not be any public transit whatsoever other than taxis, or there might not even be taxis if it's a very small place. It just depends. Next one, how do you think public transit could be improved? Right. So is the main issue with public transit that there aren't enough routes? That could be the problem with public transit is there aren't really enough routes, and so many people prefer to drive still. It could be that the public transit is too expensive. That could be an issue as to how public transit could be improved by cutting certain costs. Or maybe the public transit isn't very clean. Maybe having people clean the public transit more often could improve it. This one kind of just depends on where you are. Um, I'm not sure actually. I'm not sure how public transit could be improved in Toronto. That's a hard one because I do think public transit in Toronto overall is relatively good, certainly. I do think perhaps, and in terms of cost, I think it's pretty reasonable as well. It's a lot less than taking a car. If anything, sometimes the public transit can be messy, and so if people would clean up after themselves, I think that could improve the public transit. That's for sure. Okay. What is your favorite hobby? Oh, and I guess going back to that one quickly, because again, ideally we don't want to say, oh, I don't think it could be improved. It's already really good, even though I'm tempted to say that about a city like Toronto, right? But do try to come up with something, some way it could be improved or made even better from your perspective as well. And I know that sometimes that's going to be harder than other times, but generally the examiner doesn't want to hear, oh no, it couldn't be improved. It's perfect the way it is, or what jobs people do. Well, all sorts of jobs, right? We don't really want to say answers like that. We do want to at least say something that's going to answer their question in more detail than just, oh, everything. It's all good, or something of that sort. So do keep that in mind too. Try to come up with something, some sort of an answer, even though some of the questions are, it is going to be harder to come up with something in some cases. Okay. The next ones are, what is your favorite hobby, or what do you like to do in your spare time? So these are pretty similar questions, so you can pretty much answer anything that you like to do. One thing I like to do is I like to go fishing, for example. When did you start enjoying your hobby? I think for me, it was maybe 2017. 2017. So for about 6 years, I have enjoyed going fishing. I usually go fishing with my father and sometimes with my brother. All right, so that's a detail you could include. Or maybe your hobby is a new hobby. Maybe you just started enjoying it a couple months ago and it's a new hobby for you. That's fine too. But again, as long as you give an answer that is clear, that's the important part, right? As long as there is some answer, you don't want to say, "Oh, I'm not really sure exactly," right? You want to say something, even if it's just an approximate answer, like about 5 years ago, about 10 years ago, about 3 months ago. That's fine. But we don't just want to say, oh, who knows? I don't really know. I don't really remember, right? Try your best to remember and try your best to give, some actual time frame, as opposed to not really answering the question is key here. Okay. Do you live in a house or an apartment? Well, actually, I live in an apartment. We are moving to a house soon, though, thankfully. Do you prefer big cities or smaller towns, and why? So again, this one could be lots of reasons. For example, maybe you prefer big cities because there is more to do in big cities. You could talk about some things in the big city where you live that you can do that you couldn't do in a smaller town. Or maybe you prefer smaller towns because it's quieter. Usually, there's lower cost of living in small towns, so you can get a lot more bang for your buck when it comes to housing. We are moving to a 4 bedroom house from a 1 bedroom apartment. And let me tell you, the 4 bedroom house costs less money than the 1 bedroom apartment cost because it's in a smaller town. The one bedroom apartment was in a big city. It was in Toronto, Ontario. So that could be an example why someone might prefer smaller towns. You could say there's less traffic in smaller towns, so it takes less time to get to places, right? Any number of things, right? There could be any number of reasons why you prefer big cities or smaller towns and why. Do you have any pets? Okay, for let's say you don't have any pets currently. Think about a time when you did have a pet. So you could say, no, I don't, but I used to have a pet, and it was a dog, and its name was, I'm not sure, Spudsy, or whatever the case is. That could work. Or maybe you don't have any pets personally, but maybe a family member of yours has a pet, or maybe you grew up with a pet. Again, do try to come up with something, even if your first initial instinct is, no, I don't have any pets. If you do, probably not too hard a question. For example, I have a bearded dragon named Echo, right? He is my pet. My parents have 2 dogs. Their names are Bentley and Scooter, right? That's an example too. Do you have any brothers and sisters? Yes, I have 2 younger brothers. I'm not going to use their real names here, but their names are Fred and George. And Fred is 20 years old and George is 15 years old. Again, not real information. I'm just making that up, but there you go. So you can talk about if you have any brothers or sisters. And no, I don't have any sisters, right? This one, actually, I think this one would be okay to say, no, I don't have any brothers and sisters if you really don't. You could talk about someone who is like a brother to you or like a sister to you if you have that. But this one, if you really don't have any brothers or sisters, it's kind of hard to, say a different answer there. Are you married or do you have a significant other? Yes, I am married, and I won't say his actual name, but you could say your significant other's name if you are comfortable doing so as well. Do you have any children? No, I don't have children. This one might be a bit hard too if you're like, oh no, I don't have any children. You could talk about whether or not you might like children in the future if you want to. So maybe you would like children in the future, or maybe no, you don't really plan to have children in the future. Maybe you have children and you have grandchildren, right? Who knows, right? Anything like that is good to include. So yeah, so those are some just basic sample questions about yourself. I know with today, a lot of these questions you may have seen before, you may have already answered before at this point in your English journey. So if you found this speaking task not too hard, that's totally fair. If you did, I would suggest continuing to practice this further. And I am also happy to give you sample tests as well, and actual practice time with me as well. Even if you are taking the asynchronous version of the course, you still have the option of getting together with me sometime, and I will be the examiner. I will ask you these questions. I will give you feedback according to what they are looking for. But I do want to talk a bit about what are the main things they're looking for with these speaking tasks in general. And I will repeat myself with this many times. It's very important. They're looking for fluency, right? So they're looking to see, are you speaking in English very clearly, or are you constantly pausing, right? They're also looking for good grammar, right? So are we pausing after every sentence, right? Are you pausing when there's a comma, for example, right? Are we pausing in areas where it makes sense to pause, right? As opposed to just random places, right? Because if we pause randomly, that maybe that shows us a lack of perhaps fluency in English. Now, if you're pausing with intention after a period, after a comma, after a semicolon, before saying a list, things like that, then that makes good sense, right? It's important to have proper grammar, even when we're not writing, even when we're just speaking. Another one is good vocabulary. So try to not just use vocabulary that they directly use, try and use other relevant words. So, for example, with the weather, right? Thinking of what are some weather words that would make sense. Sunny, rainy, cloudy, windy, degrees Celsius, degrees Fahrenheit, right? Any words like that are good to use. And also, what was the last one? There was one more important one as well. Oh, yes, pronunciation, right? So making sure that you pronounce the words properly. Now, one thing they do not mark on with the IELTS test is accent. Your accent does not have to be a specific accent, but they do want the pronunciation to be good. So making sure that you know how to properly pronounce the words is going to be key here as well. Okay, so making sure that you can do that accurately, and I will happily give feedback for all of those things. But that is it for today. The goal today is now you can introduce yourself. Now you can also answer some questions about yourself. You can also talk about your personal experiences and personal preferences. And one big tip I have for all of these is do try and come up with some sort of answer, something that's related to what they're saying, because there are some of these where, for example, if they ask, do you have any pets, and you don't, it could be easy to say no, right? However, we want to say more than just one word as your answer, right? This is one of the questions on your test. So, no, I don't, but I used to have a pet dog named Spudsy. Or, no, I don't, but my parents had two cats and their names are Ellie and Nazi, for example, right? Or I'm not sure, I'm just making it up, but that's something that is really important, is to make sure you come up with something that is relevant and that is more than just a yes or a no. Even if you're asked a yes or a no question, do try to not answer with just yes or no. Do try to say a bit more than that that's relevant, because yes, just saying yes or just saying no, though that's not really going to get you very many points in the vocabulary category of things, right? They want to hear more vocabulary that isn't just yes or no, right? Okay. So yeah, so that is it for today. Good work today, everyone, and I will see everybody back for day 2. In day 2, we're going to be talking about speaking task 2. So good work today, everyone.